Emily's here and she's going to kick us off for the next portion of the event today. Emily works for the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center, and she can start off by sharing a little bit more about herself and about MAIC, and is going to really talk to you today about farm ambassadorship and social licensing concepts that we popped up here and there briefly throughout the day yesterday, but she's going to hopefully go into a little bit more of a deep dive about it and just continue to explain best practices and why it's so important. So be sure to ask her lots of questions. She's a great resource, and get away.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm a social scientist actually at the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center. I'm gonna try to stand angle like this. I do social science. I've been at MAIC for the last 2 years, but I've been working in like aquaculture related social science research for like the last 10 years ish. My research is mostly like public perceptions. I do a lot of survey work, which I'm like weirdly excited about. I also do like, interview stuff for projects. And then social license has been a big part of my research in the last however long. I'm curious though, do you think we could I get an introduction for everybody just to see where you're at, where you're working? Awesome. Yes, you just with us now. Yeah.
Daniel, sea farmers.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, awesome.
Nick, Maine families.
Awesome. Cool. So most of you, Nick's really, you're gonna be the only one doing like some non-aquaculture farm stuff, but he's gonna be doing some social science stuff with me. All right, how do I advance? Click. Okay, so I thought I'd start talking about or start this talk by talking about why community is important in your farm. So the main reason is because most farms are operating in shared waters. So this isn't always the case. We do have land-based facilities here in Maine. They go through a different permitting process. But in most cases, you're operating in shared waters, which is a public good. It's a shared resource. So how many of you are familiar with the lease or licensing process in Maine? It's one, a couple of you. Cool, I'll just do a brief overview. So because you're in shared waters, you have to secure a lease or license from the state if you want to farm in the ocean. So there's a couple of different avenues here. Some farms use LPAs, which are the smallest. There's 400 square feet. Some farms have like 10 LPAs and can produce quite a bit off of those. They expire yearly and they don't require any public hearing, but they do make you notify landowners within 300 feet of your lease. So there is some public outreach, and even LPA farmers do a lot of social license work. Experimental is kind of the next stage up. It's kind of on your way to a standard lease, maximum of 4 acres for a maximum of 3 years. Sometimes you need a public hearing with that, depending on if there are any public concerns. And then the standard lease, it's a maximum of 100 acres, but the vast majority of farms are super small in Maine, just to put that in perspective. And it's up to a maximum of 20 years. A public hearing, so there's a couple of different points of public interaction in your leasing process. There's a scoping session, which is run by the farm, where it's kind of more of like an informational question answering, but they can get pretty intense. And then there's the public hearing, which is organized by the state. And standard lease, you have to notify people within 1,000 square feet or 1,000 feet of your lease site. So that's kind of the difference between leases. So just from a license or lease perspective, public input is incorporated into that. So that's one reason why your community, your neighbors are really important, because community members have a say. But it's also kind of the right thing to do, right? Because you're operating in a shared space, water moves. Like if gear floats away, it could end up on a neighbor's beach. So what you do, you need to consider, the other users and be respectful of that. So community members are important stakeholders. So I love this quote. This is from a project I'll talk a little bit about. This is from Graham, who's an oyster farmer. And he says, at the end of the day, we're sharing, I think it says the waters underneath my Zoom screen with everyone else. And the coast of Maine is a public good, so you're using a public good, you're renting it, and this is all done with the goodwill of the state. And so much of that is based on the goodwill of the people that you're sharing the water with. So if you're not doing your job to engage with the community and develop social license with stakeholders on whatever body of water you're on, quite frankly, I don't think you should be doing aquaculture. I guess that's it. We're all sharing the water. The sharing part is the important part. That's what it says underneath that block. All right, so Graham talked about social license. I think you'll probably hear this again over the summer. It's kind of a buzzword, but it's a concept that's becoming popular because it's really important. So the definition that I like to use most is it's the informal, ongoing acceptance or approval of a project that's granted by the community. So it's a way of describing community support for a project. It is, oh, the colors are funny. That's supposed to be green and red on the bottom of this scale. It exists on a continuum. So it's not like a formal thing that you get from a community. It's just kind of a way of capturing this gradient. So it ranges from withdrawal or withdrawn or withheld, which is at the bottom there, to all the way to co-ownership, or researchers say psychological identification. But that's when like a community embraces the activity and incorporates it into their identity. So like a fishing town, like much of Maine, or a farming town or a mill town. So that's that co-ownership level. But I like to put the scale on here because it has this tolerance level in the middle, and that just shows that that is not social license. So like tempting to just, it's tempting to try to slide in under the radar and just like not ruffle any feathers. But the research shows that it really is important to make sure your community is aware of what you're doing and is supportive. It's dynamic, so it's constantly being renegotiated. There's a couple of pinch points, like obviously your lease term is really important. That's when the community is super involved, or if you're going to expand. But there are also these little moments, which is what I think is going to be most relevant for you all, that are important. And there are those points that social license can be kind of reevaluated by the public. So this one paper, it was related to forestry, but it really applies. She called these moments game changers. So like say a storm, you get a really bad storm and some of your gear floats off and it floats upon somebody's beach. So that could go either two ways, right? Like the landowner could see the pieces of gear and be like, oh man, those oyster farmers are trashing my beach. And that could be bad. Or the farmer could look for their gear that they know they lost, make a relationship with that person and be like, oh, let me come get this stuff. And then they get the support of that person. So it could really go either way. Things happen, but it's really the farms and the farm crew's responsibility to kind of make sure those game-changing moments are in your favor, where you get a supporter rather than somebody who's like grumbling about the trash on the beach. So it's dynamic. It's all about trust. So social license is building trust. So it's trust from your community or your network. I say community loosely, but I'm really talking about your network of stakeholders, which essentially we think about community, think about like your local community, your neighbors, but it can be broader than that. So there's community of place, which is your neighbors. And then there's community of, some people say interest, or community of practice. Those are people who are kind of like interested in what you're doing that aren't geographically linked to your farm. So they might be like NGO representatives or other farms that aren't really in your vicinity that are kind of important to your business. So that's what I mean by community. So it's all about trust. And then the other thing that I just like to point out in all of these talks about social license is a lot of times people talk about social license and public perceptions like they're the same thing, and they're related, but they're different. So public perceptions, we're talking about like broad community support, and that's for an activity. It's not related to specifically one farm. So these are like broad public perceptions. And then social license is really about the relationship between your farm and the community. So they're related because social license work can create these positive experiences that can help, boost that positive public perception. And then it makes it easier for future farmers to get social license. But it can go either way. So that's how they're related. Okay. Oh, uh-oh. Did I slide? Come back. I even have a Mac, You think
Yeah, this one's finicky.
Maybe hit the PowerPoint button, maybe it'll come back. No, no. Okay, that's my talk, everyone.
Where did it go? Oh, there we go.
There we go. Okay, I'll try not to do whatever I did. So, we think about social license a lot as like a tool for farmers, a way of thinking about, managing community support, but it's also a community empowerment tool. So, and it is because being able to withhold social license can provide, a certain amount of environmental security, so communities have more of a say over what happens to their shared resources. It can give the community the power to dictate how they want companies to act. And I saw this a ton in the social license guidebook project, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But even farms in Maine, like small farms who aren't actually facing any opposition, they're still doing all kinds of outreach with the community to build that social license, even when they're not facing opposition. So it is working. It's making farmers just being aware that threats, that the opposition could happen, is making them be like better neighbors. And it can lead to regulatory changes. So like changes in what gear is allowed. Community members can pressure governing officials to kind of get changes like that, either in support of or to restrict development. So that's how it's a tool for the community. For farmers, it's really like a preventative, often thought of as a preventative tool for, they say, mitigating social risk, which is like opposition. But it's also protective. So I saw this again a lot with the guidebook project. It's also protective. So farms that had their community support and their neighbor support, they'd have, like, if they were in trouble with this is one example, this is a kind of an extreme, but one farmer, he put out some gear before he was supposed to. It was an accident, but he got into some trouble with DMR, and all his neighbors wrote letters to DMR and were like, it's okay, we're, you know, he's great. So they kind of had his back, and that was really important for that moment. On a smaller scale though, like neighbors calling and being like, hey, your lines look a little weird out there after a storm, or like you left your boat lights on, you want me to paddle out and go, you know, go shut your boat lights off. So things like that. And then it can also increase the positive public perceptions, which can be helpful for growth of the industry. And then there are real risks of not considering social license. So I heard this over and over again from farmers. People are like, it'd be stupid not to do this stuff because it takes a lot of time, but it's easy stuff and it really matters for the success of your farm. So at the farm level, if you don't have social license, or if you don't work to get social license, it can cause delays in your lease approval process. A lot of times this results in costly legal battles because the people that are fighting you oftentimes are wealthy riparian landowners with lots of resources and lots of education, and they can work the system and draw it out and make it expensive. And then worst case, it can result in lease denials. And then at the industry level, it can lead to, again, regulatory restrictions, like changes in what gear is allowed, or like the size of the site. And then the formation of anti-aquaculture groups. So I don't know if any of you are aware, but we do have some of these going on in Maine. And it can be super challenging. And then obviously damaging to public perceptions. All right. So, second. So thinking about social license, I wanted to ask you all first, what role do you think you play in generating social license for your farm? Yeah, go ahead. Shout them out. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great one. People are going to come up and they're going to ask questions. Yeah.
It was a big family to be able to go through lots of revision and go through.
Yep, that would be good. What else? These are great ones. Think of any other ways? And this is just on when you're out there. Anyone from the Zoom? Just want to invite you to speak if you want to. I do have a list, so you don't have to come up with any more. Okay. So, some of these you talked about. I'm gonna back up though for a second. So this chart, it comes from the social license project I keep referencing and not talking about. I usually include a slide in here with the QR code. So, but I forgot to put a slide in, so I'll just tell you about it. So we just wrapped this up like 6 months or so ago. But for the past kind of year and a half, we've been working on this project. It's a co-created guidebook for social license for farmers. We worked with 30 shellfish and seaweed farmers in Maine. It was based on interviews, but they gave kind of input throughout the whole process. And the results were, it's like a guidebook on strategies to build social license with your communities. And the guide is online, and there's a bunch of supplementary kind of resources if you don't want to read the whole thing, because it is pretty long, but it's a lot of farmer quotes. So if you're interested, I can give you all the website after. But yeah, there are a couple of like infographics with summary versions of that. But this chart came from that project. So these are the trust generating actions that create social license. So these came up out of a question I asked that was like, what generates trust with your community? Something like, what generates trust with your community? And so these are all volunteer answers. This wasn't like, I didn't ask them, how many of you abide by regulations? Because you can see over there, like the percentages on the right. Obviously more than 14% of the farmers I talked to abide by regulations. These are just the percent of farmers that brought this up on their own in interviews. So some of the most common ones, I expected these. Communication is a huge part of social license. So it's being honest, transparent, voluntary communication. So that's like reaching out beyond what's just mandated by the permitting process. So instead of just, notifying the people within 1,000 views, like going out and engaging with other people. Operational practices. So this is where I thought this was most relevant to you all, or these operational practices. So things like keeping a tidy farm. I was shocked. So I'm not a farmer, and that's not one that I would have come up with without talking to other farmers. Being like, keeping your farm clean is important to, generating community trust, but it makes so much sense. Reducing impacts was another one. And this one, it's pretty broad category, but it was anything from like not playing music before 9 a.m. because you have, some like older people living next door that don't want to hear your music before then. So it really depends on what's meaningful to your community. In other cases, sometimes it was more extreme. Like I talked to a seaweed farmer who opted to pull all of his moorings out at the end of the season, which isn't feasible for every farm, but he had the gear and it wasn't that big of a deal. So he took all his moorings out because the lobstering community, which he was a part of, they were like, you got to get out of there for the season. He was like, there's barely any lobster there, but he just did it. He did it because it meant something, and he was making an accommodation for, for his community. So reducing impacts, that's that category. Being visible is another one, and this will kind of leads into, we're going to talk a little bit about shared values, but so being visible out on the water really helped to generate trust just being there, because people were seeing you out there working hard, and people love watching people work hard. They're like, oh yeah, look at them out there. Especially young people, this really mattered. Like I interviewed a few younger farmers, female farmers. They're like, just seeing me out there, working hard, pulling in coolers at the end of the day, like that really helped me gain the respect of the landowners that were there. And then abiding by regulations. This one seems kind of a given, but it's really important, because not only did the community, like, they can trust you more if they think that you're following the rules. So like one farmer was like, we're rule followers in every sense of it, so we do everything by the books, and the neighbors know that. So they know they're not going to like overstep or try to, take more, expand their space without asking. So that's another way. And then community benefits is the last bucket here. And so this is also related to you all. I think we'll talk about this stuff more when we talk about off the farm, but offering the community tangible benefits for using the shared resource. And that's kind of like a trade-off that people kind of makes it easier to gain that trust. So one, using product as interface, tons of farmers do this, like give out oysters to their neighbors. It's a really easy peasy way of making, especially that type of clientele that's living on the water, happy, because everybody loves local food. People love oysters. So, and actually, so this is surprising, but kelp farmers, you'd think they wouldn't be doing that, because like who wants a giant bag of, like, here neighbor, here's a big bag of like seaweed that you can do whatever. But they were drying it and like giving samples, and so they were doing it just as much as the oyster farmers were. Filling community needs. People were talking about how they volunteer in community committees, how they coach local sports teams, just getting involved in their community so they get to know people, build up that social capital. Helping others on the water, like kayaks floating away that they know are that person's, they bring them back, or like letting someone know if their boat, like a sailboat flipped, something like that. That's also another example. So yeah, that was a side note, but generating social license on the farm. These are some of the things that you all can do while you're out there. So you talked about being friendly with visitors. That's a really big one. If people are curious, they really want to know. So you'll probably get people, depending on where your farm is, paddling up and saying, seeing like, what's going on over here? So being friendly, waving, talking about the farm. Other things like being aware of noise. Don't be like screaming in the at 7 a.m. in the morning at your neighbors, because sound really travels across the water. Picking up related to keeping a tidy farm, like if stuff was exploding away in the water, just grab it. Following the rules and listening to your supervisors, making sure you're by the books. And then this last one, paying attention to how your supervisors communicate with the public, I think could be really useful while you're out there, just so you learn how to talk about your farm, like learn about your farm's mission, the growing practices, so then you can kind of be an ambassador out in the world. So, any questions on that? I'm not even stopped for questions. Yeah.
The volunteer communication, that was like a farm. What would that look like? What are they doing?
Yeah, so that's like anytime they would reach out to community members, or like go knock on someone's door, or go out and like do a presentation at a school. It's kind of anytime that they did forms of outreach that were, communications based, that was not mandated by the permitting process. So your public hearing didn't count. So if you just do the bare minimum, like that's been shown in aquaculture, but also other, like the mining industry, forestry. If you're just doing the basics, people are like, they're just doing the basics. They don't really care. So it's really about showing that you really care. And it's not a tactic either. This is one of the things that comes up. It's like, is social license, like, is it a way to like manipulate your community to get your community's approval so they'll go along with it? But that's really not what's going on. Like, people really care. I didn't see any evidence of that in any of the interviews that I did. So people do. The farmers they really care. They really care about their environment, and they know that people matter in their own, whether they can farm in that, but also just like, it's a shared resource, so we should be respectful. So that answer your question? Any others? All right, so off the farm, I kind of gave some of these, but what's your role in generating social license off the farm? This is not it can be on the clock, I guess, if you're gonna do like, any of you doing farmers markets, like any sales stuff, or are you all just on the water? Ish.
There's like, my place where to make some education stuff.
Awesome.
Kids, like daycares and schools.
Yep, so that's technically off-ish. But this can be when you're not working too.
I'm working at part of the co-op. They own a oyster bar, so just talking with people,
Yep.
letting them know what we do, and like I would be on like the shucking side and like stuff like that. So just talking to people coming in for the restaurant, letting them know what we do and stuff like that as well. So
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, that comes back to that product too,
Yeah.
like shared interest of the oyster
Right.
people. Yeah, I talked to, probably at least 5 or 6 who talked about shucking at like weddings and how that was so important because that's the clientele too, that if you're thinking strategically, like the wealthy landowners are often the ones that are giving you a lot of hard time. So if you're like mingling with that kind of crowd, it really helped some of the farmers out, because it wasn't just, I mean, it's relationship building, but also being able to dispel some of those myths, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but, you know, people thinking it's really easy to get a lease, and that's like, it's really not easy to get a lease at all. And so, you know, one farmer was like, well, it took me 6 years to get my lease, and the person that, you know, he was checking for was like, are you kidding me? I thought that, you know, they approved like all the leases that come through. It's like, that's not really the case. So in that informal setting, it was, you know, he was able to kind of dispel some of those myths without being like, no, you're wrong, you know, in a confrontational way. What else? What are the other ways? So say you're not even working, it's totally unrelated, and somebody comes up to you just like, well, how would you know? I guess maybe you have a shirt on or something that says you're oyster farm. It's somebody, you know, somebody comes up and talks to you about it. Like, those are opportunities to be farm ambassadors when you're not even working. So I have another list here. Oops, maybe I don't. I guess this is related, but so talking about your farm, that's basically what it's all about. Like, talking about it when you're off the farm, even when you're, you know, maybe in these educational events, maybe you are working, but it's the way you talk about it. So be prepared to talk about it. So while you're, I don't know how many of you have experience before this, but if you don't have any experience, so this is the time, like when you're out there working, asking questions, learning about your, you know, you're going to be learning so much this summer. But ask a lot of questions so you have the answers when people ask you. So all the research that's out there says people don't know about aquaculture, and it's true. It's like, I've been working in aquaculture related for like 10 years, and I feel like my closest family still has no idea about aquaculture. They're like, wait, like lobsters? But that's true, it's true everywhere. Like, even in Maine, Mainers are a little bit more knowledgeable than the rest of the US, but most people don't know very much. So, and there's research that connects knowing more with support. So the more people know, the better people feel about aquaculture, and especially engagement with farms. That is also linked. So this is kind of your opportunity to start to fill some of those knowledge gaps. So I think some of you nodded when I was talking about the anti-aquaculture groups. So that is happening, and they have like some talking points out there. So and they're actually going like town to town along the coast to try to institute aquaculture moratoriums. And they're usually like a lot of fear-based tactics, but it's really who gets to these people first that don't have that knowledge. So it's filling these knowledge gaps before somebody else does. So that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. Be honest too. If you don't know something and you're out, somebody asks you a question, you just be honest that you don't know, that you're just, you know, this is my first summer doing it. But if you're interested, maybe you can point them to some resources, or say you'll ask if you're going to see them again. And yeah, share your excitement. That's this. I was looking for a GIF. It's from Elf. Yeah. Yeah. So how many more minutes? Like 3 more minutes? Yeah. Okay. I think that this is really important to talk about. So I just went through a workshop, and it was all about shared values and how to talk with people that are opposed to aquaculture. So this is something that you might run into off the farm. In a way, you can kind of not necessarily, you might not be able to change everyone's mind, and that's the truth. Like, some people are just, they feel the way they feel. But there are ways. So number one, kill them with kindness. Like, it has never worked to be like, actually, this is what it is. Like, never ever works. So you need to connect through shared values. So be respectful, like listen to the concerns. Usually, like if somebody hits you with an incorrect fact, it's not really about the fact, it's about the feeling that's underneath, you know? So maybe they're like nervous about restricted use of the water, or they're like thinking about the other users and feeling like aquaculture might be dangerous, or they've watched some films from Oceania and are worried about like what all the fish in the farms are like deformed. That's what I heard that the other day from a friend. It was like, what? But so connecting through shared values. So some of the examples that we've talked about, like local food, environmental concern is always one you can like really connect, because most farmers are farming because it's a sustainable practice and they believe that it's good for the environment. It's a sustainable way to produce food. So that's like a way you can connect with people who are concerned about the environment for other reasons. Like they think that aquaculture might be dangerous, but you could say like, oh, I've been thinking about that too. And this is what we do to mitigate that. Or, you know, like we worry about that too. We make sure we don't do that by this. So it's like going through, focusing on the values, sprinkling in the facts instead of like slamming in with the facts because it just doesn't work. Yeah, know that you can't change everyone's mind. And remember that social license is really about building support rather than changing people's minds or fighting the opposition. So that's really important, I think, for farmers to remember too, because oftentimes you get like caught up with these fights, but it's really about reaching the people that are the middle, the malleable middle. And I think I just have a summary slide. Yeah, here we go. It's about building trust. This is how you can help your farm earn and maintain that social license. You're part of the farm now, so you play a role in their success and you play a role in the success of the broader industry. And that's what I have.
All right. So our next session right here before lunch, we're gonna get to hear from some participants who joined the Aquaculture Pioneers program last year and the year before. And I have a few questions for them just to kind of get at what their experience was like in the program, if they have any tips or tricks or words of wisdom to share with you all as you're starting out this summer, learning about kind of what they learned and where they are now. And hopefully you all have some questions for them. They went through this program with a lot of the same employers doing a lot of the same things. So they are a wealth of knowledge for you all. So on Zoom, we have Andrew Hoffman and Amy Gaiero. Andrew and Amy, can you hear us okay?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh.
Awesome. Can you guys hear them okay?
Yeah.
Cool. And then if you want to come here, we have Drew and Robyn as well. So some folks on Zoom and some folks in person with us today. Okay, I'm gonna get out of the way. And I'm gonna kick it off just with a couple of questions for them to start. And if you guys have any questions at any point, raise your hand and let us know. And maybe we can do, I'll ask the question and then the folks on Zoom can go first and then the folks in the room can go first. Does that make sense? Okay. Pulling up my questions. So yeah, I guess maybe just start out by just sharing your name and what farm you worked at when you were in the Aquaculture Pioneers program.
I'm Andrew. I worked at Bangs Island Mussels during the program, and I'm still working there today.
Hi, I'm Amy. I worked at Pematic Sea Farms up in Ellsworth, Maine, and I currently run and manage Naughty Sisters Sea Farm in Yarmouth.
Hello, I'm Drew, and I work at Luke's.
Hi, I'm Robyn. I worked at I'm so sorry. I worked at Cheap Manan Oyster Company.
Right. So for the folks on Zoom, what originally led you to pursue a summer aquaculture work experience and participate in the program? What were you most interested in or excited about in this industry?
Yeah, I did a program with Sea Education Association, which is kind of like a sailing program. So I lived on a boat for a summer for 6 weeks, and it was all kind of oriented towards marine science and learning about the ocean and doing some research. And so that kind of made me really interested in researching the ocean and working on the water. And as I kind of learned about aquaculture after doing that program, I became really interested in it. Kind of the idea that you can make sustainable protein without harming the ocean, and in fact, often helping the ocean and cleaning the bays and stuff. So I knew I was really interested in aquaculture, and this seemed like a really cool program and a good way to get my foot in the door, and it certainly was. It's great work experience. And I don't think there's a better way to kind of gain that knowledge, especially I was in college, so it was a great way to spend my summer for sure.
To be completely transparent, I really needed an internship. And if you guys don't know, my sister is the owner of Naughty Sister Sea Farm. So when I realized I needed this internship in order to graduate, she was like, I can get you one. You might not like it. And so I ended up getting in that way, but it wasn't that far from what I was interested in. I was studying sustainability science, and grew up on the coast of Maine. So, it was definitely interesting and an enjoyable time, but yeah, not as maybe as specifically looked for as some of you guys.
But yeah, I mean, I grew up spending my summers in the area, and I think, I knew a little bit about aquaculture, and I knew it was a growing business and a cool opportunity to do something sustainable. And I wanted to be in Maine for the summer and have the opportunity to work outside and do what I want to do on the water. And so this seemed like a great opportunity to try that out.
I something similar. I really wanted to do something hands-on and outside, and I'm a minor in my university with aquaculture, and I got the exam through the school to apply for this program, and I needed it out for the summer, so I just applied and waited to see where it went.
Did any of you have prior experience working out on a farm before your summer in the program?
I didn't have experience working on farms, but I did have a little bit of water experience, which was definitely helpful, but I kind of went into it without knowing anything about farming. So it definitely a lot to learn, but it's pretty easy to get settled pretty quick. Yeah.
Wanted to hear from you guys if kind of how your expectations about the summer matched or didn't match with how the summer actually went. Was there anything about your experience over the summer that surprised you or that maybe you weren't expecting would happen over the summer?
I think what I was most looking forward to was working on the water. It's really fun getting out there. And that definitely matched up. I mean, every day, even now, every day I'm out on the water, it's awesome. So I was really excited about that, and it's still really cool. But I think overall it was kind of what I was expecting. There's definitely a lot of hard work. And that's something that, it's still hard work today, even after doing it for a year. I'm still pretty tired on weekends, and it's a pretty rigorous schedule, but it's definitely really rewarding. And I didn't really expect it to be that rewarding. It feels good after a long day of work to, be tired and feeling good about yourself.
Yeah, I would say that I had not worked on the farm previously with my sister, even though she had it for 2 years prior. But I kind of knew what I was getting into beforehand. But it was very interesting to have that opportunity to work on a different farm, and see how like day-to-day farming can change between two different sites, even if we were harvesting, but we were both focusing on oysters. So kind of learning how you might be doing this, you think one thing, but it might be different. So it was a really great perspective to see how people change, because oyster farming is not like an exact science. It's very much like it's a lot of things that could go right. There's a lot of things that do go wrong. And just kind of like figuring out how are we gonna adjust to these problems. And each farm has a different way of going about that, I would say. But yeah, also definitely a very rigorous job. It's not, you're gonna get down and dirty. So
I don't think I had any expectations necessarily, but I'll echo how it was a very tough summer, very rewarding, but it's tough working out in the water. And I think another thing that surprised me is how much I learned. There's so much that goes into farming. And I thought it would be just strictly manual labor, and I just learned so much about how oyster farming works and how so I learned a ton.
I mean, I didn't really have any expectations either. I knew a little bit about oysters from school, but I mean, we did a project because there was another intern for a different program. We did a project on oyster growth, which I wasn't really anticipating when joining an oyster farm for depth, and so I really enjoyed having that experience. But I know it's really hard work. I physically couldn't do some of it, but I can help.
what in terms of, knowledge or skills or things, like what advice do you have for these folks who, are heading into the summer? Like, what are the most important skills or knowledge that'll be applicable, to them throughout the summer?
I think one piece of advice I'd give is just advocate for yourself, and kind of be curious and talk to your employers about what you want to learn, because they're investing in you and they want you to learn as much as you can. So they want you to be curious. They want to know what you're interested in, and they'll definitely help you pursue that. So if there's something that the farm does that you think is really cool and it's a project that you want to work on, just advocate for yourself. Tell them like, I really want to learn that stuff, and they'll definitely find a way to help you out with that.
Yeah, I would definitely second that as an employer this year. Just like know that at least like on our farm, and I'm sure every other farm, we just want you guys to have the best experience. You know, like an internship is meant for you to learn about our industry and see if this is for you and what isn't for you. And like, how can we find those avenues of like, if you want something aquaculture adjacent, or if you want to stay in aquaculture, and how can we help you like grow? Like, we just want you to have a good summer. It might be hard, but don't be afraid to just tell us those things. And a lot of bosses will have more respect, I think, when you're willing to let us know that that's how you're feeling. That's what we're dealing with, you know.
Yeah, I think similar, ask a ton of questions. It's the people you're working with are super knowledgeable, and they're the ones on the front doing their work, and they're gonna have a wealth of knowledge. So just keep asking questions. Come in with energy. I think being excited to work and remembering how lucky you are to be out on the water, even when it's hard, is important, because it's gonna get hard, and just remember that you're having fun out there on the water.
I would say morale is huge. Like we had a few like weeks in the summer where there was like a little bit of a lull. The weather was gross, you know, everybody was tired. And like we had one guy that would always like crack jokes, and it was one of the greatest things ever. So really like that's kind of like how you go into it is really important, and also having a really great pair of boots, because my boots were not warm at the end of the summer.
Yeah, that's a good point. So to follow up on that in terms of, so I think some of the folks here have just recently started, and some of them are going to be starting in the next couple of weeks. So in terms of like, what should they know for the first day? Like, how should they show up and come prepared for like that first day or that first week?
I think, well, every farm's pretty different, so it kind of depends, I suppose. I would say definitely reach out and ask. When I showed up my first day, I didn't have any gear or anything. Luckily, they didn't send me out on the water on the first day, but they helped me get situated pretty fast and get gear. But it's a dirty job. I mean, wear grubby clothes that you don't mind getting super dirty. I have all sorts of clothes that are just ripped and torn and so dirty. So just be prepared for that. But I think your farm will definitely help you get some gear and get situated, get your 2 feet on the ground before they really send you out there.
So another thing that I wanted to ask, so you all shared about, you know, how it's manual labor, it's physically demanding, but it's also rewarding. And so I'm hoping you all could share a little bit more about what the most rewarding part of the summer was for you, like what parts of the experience did you enjoy most out of it?
I can go. I would say that like within this last year working with my sister, one of my favorite jobs or like experiences is working with people consuming our product. Being able to see someone enjoying what I'm doing, because I very ironically I'm actually very allergic to oysters. And so I don't get to enjoy them at all. And I kind of disassociate when I'm on the farm from them. I'm like, these are rocks. So being able to educate people about them and to be able to see them enjoying it and be like, get really into it, because I worked at a raw bar as well, just like getting those opportunities to talk to people and explain what we're doing. Because I don't know if you guys have had a lot of discussions with other people about aquaculture, but I actually went to school in Iowa. So they have a lot of misconceptions about what aquaculture is, what we're doing, things like that. So I would just say those moments of being excited to tell people what we're doing and how we're doing it and how it's great for the environment and stuff like that.
I know for me personally, it's really like satisfying to actually see something out. But my like the most fun I think I've had was out in the water, like actually driving the skiff, and being able to like get in the water, mostly submerged and flip bags, because you can truly see the biodiversity and wildlife like, as you're doing that. And we at one point have had a bird that would like come up and so we were thinking that. It was so like cool to see all the interactions with the wildlife too.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think the best part of the job is being able to be out on the water and outside. 8-10 hours a day, like every day throughout the summer, you just see things and get to understand a place, that river better than you could have imagined you could, like see, like waking up and seeing the sun and over the water like 7 in the morning on a beautiful clear day is an experience that like I remember where a bald eagle swooping down and grabbing a fish. You just don't get to see those experiences when you're spending that large amount of time on the water. And then on the oyster side, being able to put out at the start of the summer these tiny oysters, and then by the end of the summer you're pulling those out and putting them into bags, and they're like this size, and you just saw that growth. It's pretty rewarding and cool to see.
I think one thing I've really enjoyed too is the people I've met at my farm, but then also at other farms. I think people who work on the water are generally really cool, really unique, and just really awesome to be around. Definitely the people at Bangs Island Mussels are awesome, and that's part of the reason I wanted to stick around is we've become good friends, and I love being out with them every day.
And did the summer experience influence your ideas for like future career growth or that was my question. Yeah, did the experience impact your career or educational goals or interests? And if so, how?
Mine definitely, oh, go ahead, sorry.
You pick up one.
Okay, mine definitely did. I mean, I was a recent grad, and I didn't really have any plans, and so and I knew I was interested in aquaculture, so the internship or the pre-apprenticeship was a great way to get my foot in the door, and then after that, they offered me a job, and I was happy to take it. I mean, I had a lot of fun over the summer, and so I'm still working there now. I'm still really into aquaculture. I hope someday to start my own farm, and I'm actually in the apprenticeship program right now, which is really cool. And this program definitely helped me get into that. So yeah, this was an awesome start to my career for sure.
Andrew, I know you just started the apprenticeship program, but is there anything more that you could share about that? Christian came in and talked to them yesterday, but anything else you want to share about your experience so far?
Well, I think the coolest aspect is Christian mentioned to me, they're still figuring this out, but it's a 2,000-hour program, and Christian said I could potentially carry over 1,000 hours from my time at Bangs. So doing the pre-apprenticeship is definitely a great head start to that. But it's a pretty cool program where I'm already working on the farm, but now I'm kind of supplementing that with classes and farm visits of other farms. So it's kind of more supplemental for me because I already have been working at Bangs for a year. So for other people, it's a way to get them work experience, but I already have that work experience, and so I'm really benefiting from that classroom time and learning more about like oyster farming since I'm basically exclusively mussels. So really kind of getting more knowledge and getting kind of more groundwork across the industry.
I know that like personally before this, I told myself I was never gonna work on farm. I grew up like in a farming community, and doing my summers raking blueberries. So that was like my big thing was like, I'm never gonna do any sort of farm. And then I was like, oh, well, I'll apply. I love oysters. And then I got out there on the water and I loved it. So it completely like changed my perspective on farming, from a farming community, and kind of like all of the things involved in like what I might guess. So.
Yeah, because you had mentioned you were coming into the program with more of an interest and experience in the research side of
Absolutely.
of marine science, and so this was, yeah.
This is like the complete opposite, but I was like, I just wanted to do something physical and outside, and so I was like, I'll give it a shot, you know, if it's just a summer. And then I just started connecting with it.
I think for me, it was really informative to tell me that I wanna do something in the field, I wanna be outside. I don't wanna be in an office, and I think that this confirmed that for me, and it also definitely pushed me towards the marine science, I was a biology major. And my school doesn't have a marine biology major, but I'm definitely looking more to try to get grad school now for marine biology because of this experience.
And then I would just say, I don't know if Annie's there, but Annie can attest to this. But like on her farm when I worked for Pematic, we did a lot more land-based work. And so then when I started with my sister's farm, we do a lot more work directly on the water. And so getting those differences, I found myself enjoying being on the water a lot more. It made aquaculture a bit more I don't know what word I'm looking for right now, sorry. But like it has kept me in it. At first I was like, I'm not going back into the farming industry. Like that's not what I want to do when I graduated college. But now I'm on my 3rd year of working at the farm. So just kind of like figuring out like where is the right place for you? Like once you finish this, and like that was for me, like trying to keep doing it and figuring out what's there for you. Cause like if you're depending on like a different farm, like maybe you really like the hatchery part of farming, or if you like doing the tumbling and the biofouling and like that kind of work. So just finding your right fit within the industry.
So Amy participated in the inaugural year of this program at Pematic, and then last year she started working with her sister full-time at Naughty Sisters. And Amy, can you share a little bit more now about what your official role is on the farm and what that looks like for you?
Yeah, so last summer I actually ended up running the entire farm. So you know, Alicia mainly did just the sales part of it, but she had a full-time job. And so I ran and operated it from day-to-day activities to drop-offs and deliveries to special events at shucking. So you kind of name it, I did it. And I would definitely say that I gained a lot of experience working for Pematic, because I was able to do every part of the job there as well. But right now I would say like I am technically kind of like a partial owner as well of Naughty Sisters, and so that's kind of where it's led me to.
And then Anna, Robyn, and Drew, what are you up to right now?
Yeah, I have an internship at the Garland Marine Center doing a blue crab survey, so I'll start that on Monday.
And I'm just doing research on seals and salt marshes through the University of Maine.
What questions do you all have for the previous participant? Anything you want to know that'll be helpful? Yeah.
So this is a little bit,
Could you try to speak up? Just so
Okay.
that folks can hear?
it's a little bit like opposite to what your question was, Hannah, but like what's give us, like what's the worst day on the job?
I didn't want to be that pessimistic, but that's helpful.
Well, you know, it could be a worst day, maybe it's
Yeah.
not that bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can take, I think it's you're tired, it's like a Monday, you're tired, you wake up at 5 AM, it's raining, it's cold, and you gotta go out and flip some cages, like, that's not fun, there's parts of the job that aren't fun, but then it definitely evens out, like, so, and it's very rewarding after that day's over, you get home, you take a shower. So it's hard, but it's fun.
I would say one of my worst days was because it was embarrassing. Because the way my place was set up, there was a ramp down to our raft. The ramp was often slippery, and so one time the ramp was like this, and I fell straight in the water. So it was more just like it was embarrassing. You shrug it off and you just like get back to work. It was a hot enough day.
Did anybody see you?
Oh, everybody saw. That was why it was embarrassing. I could have just been fine. No, everybody saw. And like that was like I mean, there's no real like negative experiences that I would say, like, it's so like, it's such a community that like people are just willing to like teach you what you want, and like, that's my worst day. It wasn't bad, really, you know?
Yeah, I second the weather one. There's definitely some miserable days out there, but you kind of just have to embrace it. Like, know you're gonna get wet or dirty and just deal with it. I think the biggest thing is positive mental attitude. If someone's in a bad mood and you're out there with them, it just kind of brings everyone down and it's just miserable for everyone. So I'd say just try and put a front on it. And just be positive because that just helps everyone out. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely weather. It was a really wet summer last year. There was a lot of days that I was so wet, I felt dry, it felt like. Also definitely on our farm at least, hopefully not this year, but last summer we definitely had moments where, boat breaks down, we're out in the middle, what are we gonna do? Tumbler broke, just going through those moments and how are you gonna choose to react? Are you gonna get really frustrated, or are we just gonna, figure out a way to get to the dock and fix our problems? Also, don't necessarily suggest working with your sister always. But I think just like going in with a positive attitude, definitely when you're stuck on a boat with somebody for long hours and you have nowhere to escape, you really have to decide how you're going to choose to react, and it can be hard, but they might just be having just as bad of a day as you are, so.
That was a good question. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about just like the learning curve of gear and just being on a boat and being on the water and the dock. And I don't know, I'm just sort of expecting that to be a little stressful, and how the learning curve went for you guys and how comfortable you got by the summer with gear and all that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was pretty comfortable on boats before I started, but I never worked with machinery, never worked with big truck, never worked with any oyster gear, and I'd say there's definitely you're an intern. They know that they know that, I mean, obviously it's gonna differ, but they know that you're starting, and there's a learning curve, but it's not that steep. You adapt pretty quick, and you're just constantly on the job learning. You're not gonna be expected to know everything. You're gonna do what you learn as you learn more and more. You're gonna be constantly around it, so you're gonna figure it out. And you shouldn't be concerned about learning because they're also there to teach you. It's an internship.
I mean, it definitely took me a while to learn how to, track. The lines are close together, so it's hard to navigate. So that was a pretty big learning curve, but like they really do know, as you said, that you're an intern. They kind of have like, I don't want to say lower expectations, but they have realistic expectations that you've probably never done this before. That you look at a sorter and go, oh my God, what's that thing? Why is it moving like that? And usually, I know the big thing where I worked is that there was pretty much always somebody there. Like you were never by yourself alone doing something, no matter how small your crew was. Like you always had a partner doing something with you, and like that really helps take a lot of the stress off. And I know, like personally, last summer it was really wet, so the gear like itself was really nice because it was very wet. I think this summer, who knows, but it almost felt like a second skin at the end of the summer. You just pop them on and you're fine. So.
Yeah, there's definitely a learning curve, but I mean everything we do is pretty unique. I didn't know how to do a single thing when I got there, but they, like you guys mentioned, I mean they teach you everything. They don't expect you to know anything. I think the biggest thing is like working on the water can be dangerous. So just be careful. Don't do things that you don't want to do. No one's gonna force you to do things if you're not comfortable. So just, like voice your opinion if you're not feeling comfortable, and just be careful when you're out there, be aware of your surroundings. The last thing you want to do is fall in the water. And like they mentioned, you'll always be with people, but it sucks. I've dipped my leg in the water and you're just miserable the rest of the day. So
Yeah, just I would say communicate with your employer and who you're working with. If you're not comfortable, just let us know. Like, we want you to be comfortable on the water. Last summer, I had an intern through Minorities in Aquaculture, and luckily the first day we didn't really get on the water because the boat broke down. But she didn't share with me she'd never been on a boat before. I wasn't aware that I didn't know her comfortability, and we worked through that. But if you don't share those things and you don't let us know where you're at, then we'll have no idea, you know? So I would say that there's definitely like a learning curve, but just being aware, and being conscious of what's going on around you is just, yeah.
Other questions? These guys all did great. Advice sold. All right, well, thank you so much, Amy, Andrew, Drew, Robyn, for spending the time with us to talk about your experience and to share your wisdom. And hopefully you all got a lot out of hearing from them and hopefully seeing yourselves reflected in them a little bit and feeling a little bit more comfortable about the summer. But yeah, thank you all. I'm gonna end the folks on Zoom because we're gearing up for lunch here. But thank you very much. And then Drew and Robyn, feel free to stay for lunch and hang out with us for a little bit. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, good luck, everyone.